to their cash machines. Keeley says that would mean another 2,000 ATMs couldn't be accessed for welfare cash benefits. So I appreciate the concerns about the cost, but I believe closing this loophole simply won't be as difficult as some are making it out to be. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas.
I would yield myself 30 seconds and ask unanimous consent to place in the record a letter from the National Conference of State Legislatures and from the American Public Human Services Association, the National Association of State TANF Administrators. And the gentleman may be right. He clearly lacks a confidence in states' rights in these areas. The letter from the National Conference of State Legislators points out that there's a financial burden that would be imposed on the states, that the states have existing contracts with vendors that may have to be changed at significant cost to the state. Let us hope that that's not true. They come out firmly in opposition to this bill. I do not share that opposition, but I think they raise a legitimate concern about the added cost and the lack of confidence of these gentlemen in the ability of the states to police their own programs. And with that, I would yield 2 minutes to a former member of the House Ways and Means Committee, very familiar with these issues, and I hope a soon-to-return member of the House Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Gentleman from Illinois, recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for yielding. You know, as I listen to the debate and the discussion, and as I listen to my colleague from Wisconsin talk about universal access, I'm reminded of something that I read relative to the period of not just dissent, but a takeover of Germany. And I remember something that a rabbi said. You know, they came for the communists. I was not a communist. They came for the socialists. I was not a socialist. Then they came for me and nobody was left. And it seems to me that when we go after those individuals who are the most vulnerable people in our society, categorizing, stereotyping, making believe that if they get a card that they're going to be at the casino, that they're going to be at the strip joint. Well, I can tell you that the people that I know who get cards as TANF recipients are not usually found at a casino. They're not found at a strip joint. As a matter of fact, if I thought that this legislation would provide one iota, one scintilla of help for TANF recipients, I would be the first in line to support it. The reality is I don't believe it provides any help, does not provide any assistance, and I will certainly not be voting for it. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Louisiana.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield such time as he may consume to the Chairman of the Human Resources Committee, Mr. Davis.
Gentleman from Kentucky for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do feel compelled to respond since Martin Niemöller, the famous German pastor, Christian pastor, who was quoted after World War II talking about inaction, was dealing with an issue, the Holocaust, the scale of which was so unbelievably beyond the pale of a small technical fix that we're talking about here. I believe the gentleman diminished the value of whatever argument he was making by even quoting him. If I seem to recall my history correctly, when I was running a business in 1996, during the welfare debate, Martin Niemöller was resurrected from the dead again using the same quote that somehow if we just touch anything that will provide integrity to our programs, or we want to help the poor, that in fact this is the march down the slippery slope to complete takeover and removal of civil rights. Come on, folks, this is a technical business discussion. If we were running a business together, which I believe the government should be run that way, I think we'd be sitting around the table in the operations room planning ways to legitimately cut costs and more efficiently help our customers and to eliminate waste. This is a question, again, using the gentleman's own argument that he brought up, if the vast majority, which I happen to agree with him, don't go in those places in the first place, why would we not want to put in a simple program control that for that small percentage that does, to prevent them from wasting taxpayer dollars? I know from the casinos that we have across the river and some of the economic hardship that comes from that to my constituents who have families that have been damaged by this. Walking inside any number of the casinos on the Ohio River, I'm not seeing grocery stores. I'm not seeing provision for food. What I'm seeing are ATMs and access to free chips and for gambling, not to eat. And I think this begs the deeper question. To the average man or woman on the street, if we ask this question, is it reasonable? Absolutely. And I want to bring us back to the central point here, what this does. First of all, the idea that it costs too much, and I'll speak from my other life as a systems professional. The gentleman from Louisiana rightly pointed out that the fixing of the system is actually an easy thing to do, and we will find ready participation and cooperation from those who are involved because they understand the stakes in this. The goal of their businesses is not to further recycle of poverty. The goal of their businesses is to make sure to some degree that money is not used in a manner that reflects poor stewardship. And I think ultimately this is a backstop to assure that money that belongs to the United States taxpayer that's being given to them as assistance is going to be used in a proper manner. At the end of the day, that refutes the baseline of these arguments, and I think we make a mistake. And again, going back to the great success that our staffs have had, that the gentleman from Texas and I have had over the course of the last year, to really begin to move serious, nonpartisan process reforms that will help to fix deficiencies in the system that are not Democrat or Republican at their root, that are addressing real questions of broken processes. If we were sitting there among ourselves in a business together that we were running or with our families and we noticed that there was an issue, hey, we could put a stop to that and we could fix that. Why don't we do the same thing here? It's not an unreasonable request to look at that, and I would ask, again, several of the speakers are not on our subcommittee. I think we've had a great success of keeping the tone of the debate focused on the core process problems, not on extremely energetic and emotional rhetoric that really doesn't address this root issue. That would be my request as we move forward. And with that, I will yield back the balance of my time, noting that this is a good fix. It is a cheap way to save taxpayer money to legitimately help those in need.
Gentleman from Texas.
I will yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters.
The gentlelady from California recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. I came to the floor to address this issue, despite the fact that I understand that it's kind of a good political issue in an election year where many people will use this to say, I'm saving the government money and I'm keeping those folks on welfare who don't deserve government support anyway from using this money or this EBT card to have access in ways that will allow them to be in and take advantage of casinos and strip joints, etc. And it's a very sexy argument, and it looks good, and you'll get a lot of play off of it. So I understand that coming to the floor to protect the poor and the most vulnerable is not popular. But think about it. Just think about it. Many of you come from districts where there are liquor stores. These are small businesses, and most of these liquor stores now serve more other products than they do liquor. They have milk, they have juice, they have bread, they have meats, they have the kinds of things that many of these poor families need and they buy at liquor stores. Why do they buy them at liquor stores? Because they're in these food deserts that you've heard the First Lady talk about. Areas all over this country, whether it is rural or whether it is urban, where they don't have grocery stores. They don't have the big chains. All they have are these small businesses that are liquor stores who carry all of the products that a family could use to feed that family, not just liquor. And so I would ask you to take a real close look at this and at least exclude the liquor stores. These small businesses are very important all over this country. Yes, they sell liquor, and many of us don't like the idea that even in some of these places there are problems. But the folks who go there don't have to buy liquor. And if there are problems at any of these liquor stores, local law enforcement should do its job. Unanimous consent for another 30
Yield
seconds.
the gentlelady an additional minute.
Thank you.
Gentlelady
And
is recognized.
so, When you include liquor stores, all you're doing is attacking some small businesses who are providing foodstuffs, not just liquor, but foodstuffs, not only in inner cities, but in rural communities that families need. So this is punishment. This is being very harsh on the most vulnerable people in our society to include liquor stores in this group of stores that you would not like to have the welfare recipients use. Again, I could go along with strip joints. I could go along with casinos. But as I travel across the country, I cannot go along with excluding liquor stores from being able to provide food that's needed to these poor families that live in these food deserts where there are no grocery stores, no chains, no other place for them. And when they have transportation problems, it really does wreak havoc on them trying to get even to a place where they can buy food. So if you would understand that and work to try and make sure that this doesn't stay in here, I would appreciate
Yield
it.
the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
I will yield to the gentleman, yes.
Isn't it true that in most of the liquor stores and other establishments of that type, they charge no fees for cashing the checks because they want people to get the cash to gamble? And in many of our districts in California, they don't have to go to these payday loan places that pay exorbitant fees to get a check cash. And so that it really, in many ways, is helpful in our community.
It is very helpful, and with the liquor stores, they help to stimulate the economy. They sell all of these foodstuffs. They hire a few people. Some families have 3 and 4 family members. So, yes, I would ask that you exclude liquor stores from this consideration. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thought I made it clear, and I think Chairman Davis did also earlier, that there are provisions to allow for exceptions as long as the facility serves food. We're talking about stores that purely sell liquor. So I think the gentlelady's concerns are addressed with the bill as written. Furthermore, I would just say that on this side of the aisle, we care very deeply about this program. There's broad agreement. It's a valuable program. It's worked. And if you care about children, and you care about needy families in this country, then you should care about ensuring the integrity of the program and making sure that the dollars that taxpayers put forth for these needy families, these needy children, actually go to those families and not buying liquor and patronizing strip clubs and going to casinos. So that's what this bill intends to address. That's what it does address. It creates the proper flexibilities for the concern that the gentlelady has and others on the other side of the aisle have about access. If food is sold, access will not be denied. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas.
Well, I couldn't agree with the gentleman more about the importance of preserving, in his words, the integrity of this program. That means that none of the public funds are wasted or used in an improper way, but it also means that the program's integrity is preserved to deliver the assistance that is needed for the many, many families that are playing by the rules and need a helping hand. And that's the only area we have difference in this regard, as far as I personally am concerned. The House has already spoken on this electronic benefits issue. I don't see any harm in the House speaking again this week or next month. I don't see a great deal of gain from repassing it, but why not? But what I do see harm in is if the many, many people that are playing by the rules and need this assistance see their safety net shredded the way these same folks shredded the safety net last year when they did not renew the bipartisan TANF supplemental program that has been so important in poor states with large populations of poor people like Texas. There are families there, there are state programs there that are harmed by the unjustified refusal to extend that program, at least with what's left in the Temporary Assistance for Needy program, which we passed here as a freestanding bill in December with this provision in it. Let's pass the whole thing. So hopefully this message gets sent back. The House still feels today the same way it felt 6 weeks ago, and that's fine, but let's get this entire temporary assistance for needy family program approved and in place so the states and the families that depend upon it will have it there. And with that, I yield back if the gentleman has no further speakers except for himself.
The gentleman like to reserve his time.
I have a request for another 30 seconds, and then I can yield back to you. Is that all right?
That's fine with me.
Is that? I yield.
Very much. There's
The lady from California for 30 seconds.
Thank you. There's some confusion about what is excluded or included. As I understand it, a liquor store that sells just juice or milk would not be considered a store that sells food. Is that correct? Is that your understanding? I yield to the gentleman.
If food products are sold at a store,
Milk.
then if any type of food product, including milk, is sold at a store, their states can accept those from the provisions in this bill.
Reclaiming my time, that is not my understanding, and I would hope that we could work somehow. I'm
If the
sorry,
gentlelady
I yield
would
back.
yield,
Yes.
yeah, the definition is staple foods, which include milk.
Milk
Time's
is
expired.
included in the bill.
The gentleman from Louisiana.
Madam Speaker, I would ask if the gentleman's yielded back all of his time.
You have no. It's just yourself concluding.
I thank the gentleman. I'm pleased now to yield the remaining time that we
Does
have.
the gentleman yield back all of his time?
I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yield back the balance of his time. The
I'm
gentleman
pleased
from Louisiana.
to yield the remaining time to the chairman of the subcommittee, a gentleman who's diligently worked in good faith with the ranking member to reauthorize a TANF program with integrity that ensures that children in needy families get the assistance that they need.
Gentleman from
I yield
Kentucky
to,
is recognized for the balance of the time, which is 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I remind all of my colleagues that when we talk about such matters, it's helpful to focus on tone. The one thing I am going to respond to is when the comment was made that you people shredded, I would have to remind all of the members in the chamber and the Speaker that, in fact, that was passed in a Democratic House when the Speaker was Mrs. Pelosi and the Leader of the Senate was Senator Reid. We have worked in good faith through this process, and what I would remind folks about the fundamental question as we look at this, the real issue here, and I grew up in a dysfunctional family. I know what it means to see dysfunctional alcoholism with a stepfather leaving and spending the money in places that were inappropriate, and I think it's a fair question, as someone who has lived that as a little boy, to say, wait a minute, if Dad wants to run off with the EBT card and go to one of the boats over in Indiana, we as a body have a responsibility, Democrat and Republican, who care very deeply for this country and for our citizens, to say, wait a minute, that's not an appropriate use. The businesses themselves will cooperate. There's a contextual issue to allow the states to deal with the specific uniquenesses of providers of foodstuffs. But at the same time, I think that if an EBT card is being used in a place that may have a drink rack inside of it and pole dancers on the other end, that is not, under any standard of morality, a place that the EBT card should be used. I can think of no mother that would want the money spent there. I could think of no circumstance that would justify it. And frankly, having my own stepfather come home drunk and beat up me and my mother after running around out in town with what money she basically earned, I would say that in this case, it's unacceptable. Let's come back to the real world. I'm not going to yield my time. Let's come back to the real world and look at the reality of this. What is being asked is a procedural and a process change to give better stewardship to a program on which we agree about the fundamentals, specifically the data standardization and control. There's virtually no cost to this. I understand we have honest differences of opinion here, but I would appreciate that the rhetoric be toned down and we focus on the reality of this, that if we ask any mom or dad or recipient or taxpayer out on the street this fundamental question, I think overwhelmingly when they heard it in the context of reality and not sometimes the things that happen in the chamber here, they would look at it from a different perspective. That's what we're asking, and with that, I ask all of our members to support this very reasonable, very measured, very balanced way to fix a flaw in a program that can be made better as a result of that, be better stewards of our taxpayer dollars, and with that, I urge passage and yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back, and the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3567 as amended? And those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection to reconsider is laid upon the table. The gentleman from Louisiana. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. And pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further postponing proceedings on this question will be postponed. Time for me to get off this chair. No, Ingrid. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 1173 and to insert any extraneous material on the bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Pursuant to House Resolution 522 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 1173. The Chair appoints the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Miller, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 1173, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to repeal the class program.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Ways and Means. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, each will control 20 minutes, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, each will control 10 minutes. And the Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey.
Madam Chair, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
And the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Chairman, it has been more than 2 years since the Class Act was first debated as part of the President's health care takeover debate. We knew then that the program was flawed and unworkable, yet the Democratic-controlled Congress ignored these concerns and instead rushed the class program through as part of the President's health care law. Now 2 years and more than $800 billion later, we have finally heard from the President and his administration that while they have wasted taxpayer dollars, this program is in fact not implementable. Surprise? Well, you shouldn't be. The truth is that unbiased analysts such as the American Academy of Actuaries had raised concerns with the program as early as July of 2009, some 5 months before the President's plan was even considered on the Senate floor. Members from both sides of the aisle also raised concern about the program's long-term sustainability during this debate.
Most disturbing is what we came to find in a bicameral investigation last year that revealed concerns from within HHS were rampant during PPACA debate, but they never brought to light by the Democratic leadership or the Obama administration. Yet the program was rushed through so that we can, as then Speaker Pelosi noted, find out what's in it. And that's a quote. On October the 14th, 2011, Secretary Sebelius announced what honest accounting told us was inevitable. The Obama administration finally admitted there was no viable path forward and therefore was halting any further efforts at implementing the CLAS program. The failure of the Health and Human Services Department to implement the CLAS program certainly is not a surprise. However, it is a catastrophic consequence of what happens when Congress rushes to enact costly policies and dismisses warnings from independent experts. Most troubling are the budget gimmicks used to sell the CLAS program and indeed the entire law. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimated the CLAS program would save money by collecting premiums from enrollees, premiums that will now never be collected in light of a failed implementation. We knew, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, we knew the savings estimates for the President's health care plan were wrong. It defied common sense that such a massive spending expansion would have no cost. Now the President will have to explain to the American people why the health care law, Obamacare, PPACA, Patient Protection, Affordable Care Act, Unaffordable Care Act, he'll now have to explain to the American people why this health care law will cost them $80 billion plus more than what they were told. That is more than $80 billion on top of the trillions the President has added to the books since he took office in January of 2009. Today, we will have the opportunity to start over on long-term care reform, an issue that's important to all of us as we hear from constituents regularly about the growing cost of long-term care services. The market has not even been penetrated 10%, Madam Chair. We will now begin that process, but first we must take this section out of the health care bill known as CLAS. We must take it off the books. And I urge my colleagues to support just what this bill does, remove CLAS from the statute, H.R. 1173, repeal the failed CLAS program so that we can now move forward with reforms that do work. With that, Madam Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are millions of Americans currently in need of a long-term care program and many more that will require these services in the future. Despite the great achievements of our country, the U.S. lacks an affordable and ethical system of financing long-term care services. The CLAS program is a significant step towards finding a realistic solution to this problem. However, many of my Republican colleagues have taken a stance against CLAS without proposing any real solutions for long-term care access in America. And I strongly oppose H.R. 1173 and consider it to be a blatant disregard of a growing crisis in this country. Madam Speaker, Republicans continue to propose repeal of various aspects of the Affordable Care Act. We heard my colleague from Georgia today, and how many other times, how many on the other side have said, well, let's just repeal the Affordable Care Act, let's repeal pieces of the Affordable Care Act, but they never come up with any meaningful alternatives. And the same is true today. They're talking about outright repeal of CLAS without any meaningful or suggestion of an alternative. And my message to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that we should mend the CLAS Act and not end it. This country is already facing a long-term care crisis, but the problem is only going to get worse. As our population continues to age, an estimated 15 million people are expected to need some form of long-term care support by 2020. If we don't solve the need for affordable long-term care in this country soon, we will also jeopardize our entitlement programs. Currently, Medicaid pays 50% of the cost of long-term services, and that price tag is quickly rising every year. The CLASS program was designed to allow people to stay at home and prevent the costs of nursing home care that burden Medicaid. Now, I want to correct one thing. I know in the Rules Committee, some of my colleagues talked about the administration's position on this bill. The administration made it quite clear in a hearing that we had on this bill that they are opposed to repeal of the CLASS Act. They acknowledged there were workable solutions under the CLASS program that didn't feel that they had the legal authority, I stress legal authority, to implement them. So the Department of Health and Human Services has more work to do, and I have suggested on numerous occasions that the CLASS Advisory Council, which is organized under the legislation, be convened in order to offer their expertise. The CLASS program is a framework that will facilitate a solution to our long-term care crisis. However, all I continue to hear from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that Congress can't do anything. It's this negative attitude, the idea that Congress can't address any problem. And I just sincerely hope that my colleagues, when they come to the table, come up with a workable solution. Don't just tell me we have to repeal things, we can't do anything, the government can't do anything. Cowardly running away from the problem through repeal is simply not the answer. Overall, the CLASS Act promotes personal responsibility and independence. That's the values that you talk about a lot. It allows the government to put choice in the hands of consumers while saving Medicaid dollars. American families have too few long-term care options, and they need our help. Rather than repeal CLASS, we need to continue the dialogue and the development of a viable plan forward. Again, let's mend it, not end it. Moving forward with H.R. 1173 shuts the door on a problem that simply cannot be ignored. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, a very valued member of the Subcommittee on Health.
Gentleman from New Jersey, recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I rise today in support of repealing the CLASS Act. In hearings before the Energy and Commerce Committee, my colleagues and I learned that the CLASS program was a ticking time bomb fiscally. A new entitlement program that Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius has said is totally unsustainable financially. Richard Foster, Chief Actuary of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, wrote in 2009, 36 years of actuarial experience lead me to believe that this program would collapse in short order and require significant federal subsidies to continue. And Senate Budget Committee Chairman Ken Conrad has called the CLASS program a Ponzi scheme of the first order. To her credit, Secretary Sebelius in October called for the end of the CLASS program, adding that there was not a viable path forward for CLASS implementation at this time. And Madam Speaker, we have a serious long-term care problem that is driving patients into bankruptcy and weighing down an overburdened Medicaid program. But before we can develop bipartisan solutions to address this important issue, we must first repeal the misguided CLASS program. Only then can we begin anew and properly address the long-term health care problem. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Madam Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to the ranking member of our full committee, Mr. Waxman.
Gentleman from California is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you for yielding that time to me, Mr. Pallone. And Madam Chair, I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 1173. This bill is another Republican attempt to tear down and dismantle programs that provide health care in the United States. You know, we have Medicare, and the Republican alternative to Medicare is to just shift more costs onto seniors, give them a voucher, let them pay for more if they want more than that voucher will provide, and that voucher is not going to provide much over time. On Medicaid, they just want to shift the costs onto the states,
so the states can tell a lot of very poor people, I'm sorry, we don't have enough money to take care of you, but we're not required to under federal law. They said that they didn't want the Affordable Care Act. They wanted to repeal it. But they haven't told us what they want to put in its place. They said that this was going to be repeal and replace. They proposed a repeal. We have no proposal to replace it. Republicans now want to take a part of the Affordable Care Act, the CLASS program, that is the one and only significant new initiative to put in place to deal with our country's long-term care crisis. They say, on those who are supporting this bill, that the CLASS Act is not the right solution to our long-term care problem. Well, I don't think it's perfect either. But the solution is to amend the program to make it work, not just repeal it and leave nothing in its place. If we leave nothing in its place, we have the status quo. And what does the status quo mean? The status quo means that for some who are on Medicare, they'll have a minimal amount of coverage for their long-term care services. And to get any other help, people will have to go through the indignity of impoverishing themselves. A system that is in place for the very poor would be called upon then, the Medicaid system, to cover their long-term care needs, especially if they had to go to a nursing home. Well, many elderly and disabled individuals will be forced to leave their families and community of friends for institutionalization, because that's all that some states will cover. Families will have to do what they call spend down. They have to spend their money until they're in poverty. So they lose their dignity along the way in order to qualify for Medicaid assistance. The CLASS Act was trying to take some of the burden off Medicaid, some of the indignity away from seniors. Medicaid expenditures, for the most part, are paying for long-term care, and that will escalate even further. In 2010 alone, the Medicaid spending for these services cost some $120 billion. And we have a baby boomer population that's continuing to age. The number of Americans in need of long-term care assistance will grow, compounding each of these problems. So what is the Republican answer to this problem? Nothing. Just repeal a program that attempts to give some effort to deal with these costs for people who need long-term care. Let's not lose this incremental piece. Let's figure out how to add on to it, how to change it, but don't repeal it. I urge my colleagues to reject H.R. 1173, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I just want to remind everyone that under the CLASS Act, there's not one person in the United States who would receive long-term care benefits under that act because it doesn't work. I'll yield at this time 2 minutes to the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley.
Gentleman from West Virginia recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in favor of H.R. 1173. This bill would save hard-working taxpayer dollars and eliminate a costly and flawed Obamacare provision known as the CLASS Act. This program was sold as a self-sustaining program, one that would reduce federal spending. However, the program was problematic from the start. The President and the Democrat leadership in Congress knew this fact for over a year and a half ago and still included the CLASS program in the health care bill. During an investigation, it was revealed that the Obama administration officials and Senate Democrats were very much aware that this was not going to work, and that department officials warned for a year before passage that the CLASS program would be a fiscal disaster. As far back as May of 2009, the CMS chief actuary sent an email that warned officials that the program doesn't look workable. These 200 pages of exhibits from the exhibit show that the department officials were voicing concern to Senate leadership all the way up until passage, in December of 2009. This was all concealed from Congress and the American public. After enactment, the concerns continued. On February of 2011, Secretary Sebelius testified before the Senate Finance Committee that the class program is totally unsustainable in its present form. And finally, this past October, the Department announced that the program was still not financially feasible. What we are seeing now, as well-intended as it is, the class program is unworkable. The objective of providing long-term health care is laudable and should be a priority of Congress. Therefore, we must identify a long-term, common-sense solution for our health care. That is why last week I asked GAO to conduct a study on the Medicaid Long-Term Care Partnership Program and survey states on how to improve the partnership program so that more Americans can properly plan for their long-term care needs. This public-private partnership between states and long-care insurance plans was designed to reduce Medicaid expenditures by lessening the need to some people to rely on Medicaid to pay for long-term health care. The partnership program is not the only solution to our long-term health care, but it is a helpful tool to help Americans plan for their health care long needs, unlike the unsustainable and costly Class Act embedded in Obamacare. The repeal of the Class Act marks a small victory. Let's not try to forget that this program shouldn't be forced on the backs of hardworking taxpayers of America. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the champion for senior citizens, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. You know, there's a lot of areas of agreement. We all agree that we're in the midst of a long-term care crisis. We agree that today there are 10 million Americans in need of long-term care services and supports. And by 2020, that number will grow to 15 million, and by 2050, that number of seniors who need long-term care will reach 26 million. The costs associated with long-term care are high. We agree on that. Nursing homes can cost over $70,000 a year, and 20 hours a week of home care can cost nearly $20,000. But repealing the Class Act does nothing to address the glaring need for adequate coverage of long-term care services and supports. The Class Act addressed a number of critical needs, including providing a way for persons with disabilities to remain independent in their community and bringing private dollars into the long-term services system to reduce reliance on Medicaid without impoverishing individuals and families. And we also agree that the Class Act is far from perfect. But it does provide a framework to begin to deal with the problem. So it seems to me, if we all agree on the need, not only the need for long-term care, but the need to do better, then instead of repealing the Class Act and passing H.R. 1173 with no effective alternative, we could right now, today, sit down and work together to repair this program. By ignoring it or even postponing this long-term care crisis simply is not going to make it go away. I thank the gentleman for the time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to speak to H.R. 1173, the Fiscal Responsibility and Retirement Security Act of 2011, which repeals the class program, which was rushed into law in the President's health reform bill. Last February, HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius publicly admitted that the more than $80 billion Class Act was, quote, totally unsustainable, end quote. But it was not until 8 months later, on October 14th, that the Department of Health and Human Services announced it was not moving forward with the implementation of the class program, quote, at this time, end quote. On October 26, 2011, Assistant Secretary Kathy Greenlee testified before our subcommittee that the Department had spent $5 million in 2010 and 2011 trying to implement the program. The Secretary's conclusion that the class program could not meet the law's 75-year solvency requirement and was not sustainable was not a surprise to anyone who had been following the issue. Even before its inclusion in the President's health care law, PPACA, in March of 2010, we were warned by the administration's own actuary and the American Academy of Actuaries and members of Congress from both parties and outside experts that the program would not be fiscally sustainable. On July 9, 2009, approximately 8 months before PPACA was signed into law, CMS's own actuary, Richard Foster, wrote, quote, 36 years of actuarial experience lead me to believe that this program would collapse in short order and require significant federal subsidies to continue, end quote. I support the intent behind the class program to help Americans purchase long-term care policies that most of us will end up needing at some point, but only about 9 million Americans actually purchase. Long-term care costs are frighteningly high, and many Americans face bankruptcy or ending up on Medicaid, or both, in order to get the care they need. But while the goals of the program were worthy, good intentions do not make up for fundamentally flawed, actuarially unsound policies designed to show the illusion of savings. The President has left us with a budget hole of more than $80 billion. The irresponsible nature of the class program's inclusion in the health care law is just a sample of the budget gimmicks used to pass the health care law in the dark of the night nearly 2 years ago. The President will have to explain why, years later, the taxpayers are left with a failed program that will cost this nation at least $80 billion, that is, more than 150 Solyndra scandals. Shelving this failed program is not enough. As long as it is on the books, it will continue to create substantial uncertainty in the private sector about what the government's role in long-term care insurance will be. Let's repeal the class program, not try to tinker around the edges of a fundamentally flawed model, and take up real solutions to this problem instead. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1173 to repeal the failed class program so that we can move forward with reforms that work. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield, Madam Speaker, 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my colleague from New Jersey for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this bill. We all know that we have a long-term care crisis in this country. What we have now is an unsustainable patchwork approach, with wealthy people having access to private plans, while almost everyone else finds the cost incredibly prohibitive. These are the folks who fall through the cracks every day, spending down all their assets until there's nothing left, and then relying on our strained Medicaid program for care. This is what the class program tries to avoid. It would provide a modest but meaningful benefit to individuals who need supports to stay out of costly nursing homes, benefits they've already paid into. We can all agree that the class program as currently written in the statute is not perfect, but few things are. We can use it as a framework upon which to fix and implement this program, one that would be amended, improved, and made sustainable rather than destroyed. Repealing the Class Act does not remove the nation's need for long-term care. Rather, it makes the path to sustainable solutions much more difficult. Moreover, in the majority's rush to repeal, they have overlooked a vital component that will also be affected by this bill, the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care. The clearinghouse, which was established with close to unanimous Republican support, is the only dedicated place for individuals to learn about their long-term care options. However, a vote for this bill is a vote to strip funding from this vital public resource. In fact, the original bill abolished the program altogether until I fought to save it in our committee. And while the authorization has been saved, we all know that a program without any funding is not much of a program. So the result is yet one more obstacle for American families trying to care for their loved ones. These are the people who will lose out, and definitely lose out, by this repeal. So I strongly urge my colleagues to vote against this bill, and I yield back the balance.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today in support of fiscal responsibility and in support of H.R. 1173. The class program was created with a good intention, relieving the crushing burden of long-term care. But we have known from the beginning that this program would not be able to sustain itself without a massive bailout from taxpayers. The CBO said so. Medicare's chief actuary said so. And more recently, Secretary Sebelius concluded the Class Act was totally unsustainable and decided not to implement it. And for this, I give her credit. But the program is still in law, and given the trillion-dollar deficits that we face, the only option right now is to make sure that the taxpayers are not left with an unsustainable program in a big bill. This debate should not be about the health care law in general. It should be about this program. It should be about doing what is fiscally responsible, and that is eliminating the class program in getting to work right now in a bipartisan manner on a solution to long-term care. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire how much time remains on each side?
Gentleman from New Jersey has 9 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 7½ minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker, at this time I would yield a minute and a half to Mr. Davis.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1½ minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to thank the gentleman from New Jersey for yielding. H.R. 1173 would eliminate the potential for many of our citizens to be able to afford long-term care that provides services and other supports. This effort to remove support services is not the solution, but instead a faulty and irresponsible policy initiative which will burden people and our health systems. Regardless of when individuals may need these services, there is a lack of financing options to help them pay for the services they need to maintain their health independence and dignity when they lose the capacity to perform basic daily activities without assistance. Medicare does provide limited pay long-term care services. Medicaid does cover but pays only for services for people with very limited means. Many private long-term care insurance plans are costly and difficult to acquire. And so I say that the real answer is to retain the services that we currently are poised to provide. I oppose H.R. 1173 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Speaker, at this time I yield 1 minute to another member of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Guthrie, gentleman from Kentucky.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the gentleman for yielding. And I rise today in support of H.R. 1173 to repeal the Class Act establishing the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. The Class Act was unsustainable and unworkable from the time it was enacted. Even at the time the health care bill was passed, it was evident that the program was completely unworkable. The Class Act is such an egregious budget gimmick that even Health and Human Service Secretary Kathleen Sebelius has admitted the program is unsustainable. Repeal of the Class Act isn't as scary as those on the other side would have you think it would be. In fact, the Obama administration has already acknowledged the program is unworkable in its current form and has halted efforts to establish the program. However, the Class Act remains on the books. I strongly support ensuring Americans have access to long-term care. But in order to move forward with a new plan, we need to get the Class Act off the books. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized for a minute and a half.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the repeal of the Class Act. We are at another start of another session of the Congress, and this majority is following the same playbook as last year. The American people are waiting for this institution to do something, anything, to create jobs and restore our economic prosperity. Instead of putting forward ideological bills that have nothing to do with jobs and that are intended to roll back health care and senior care in America. Right now, less than 10% of Americans over 50 have long-term health care insurance, even though a large percentage of individuals will need long-term care services at some point. Some studies indicate that up to 2/3 of Americans that live beyond 65 will need long-term care. The Class Act, a bipartisan addition to the 2010 health reform, seeks to help to provide access to quality, affordable insurance for long-term care. The program must be actuarially sound and legally solvent. Why? Why would we repeal this bill? It is time for the majority to stop playing games, to get serious about fixing the economy. America needs more jobs, not less health care. I urge my colleagues to stand up for seniors and oppose this repeal, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New York, from New Jersey.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas.
Gentleman
Mr.
from
Doggett.
Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Is it just too much to ask that seniors who are struggling in a nursing home after a lifetime of work get a little economic security, that they get a little dignity? Is it too much to bring just a little peace of mind to a family that is burdened with a parent that's suffering from Alzheimer's or some other debilitating condition? Sadly, this does appear to be too much to ask for some. 1 year ago, the House Republican majority's first major action once they gained control of Congress was to repeal health insurance reform. And at the time they did that, they said they were for repeal and replace. And they replaced their repeal with a little flimsy 1.5-page bill that I call the 12 platitudes. And they proved to be only platitudes because during the intervening months, they've done nothing about long-term health care or any other kind of health care for the American people. Today, they continue to deny Americans actual solutions to health care problems. And once again, they have a flimsy 1.5-page bill. They don't have repeal and replace. They have repeal and deny. They're in a state of denial that there is a problem with long-term care, and they continue to deny meaningful relief to families that are struggling with health care bills, and particularly long-term health care bills. There is a 75% chance that some American who reaches age 65 will find themselves in need of long-term care. And paying for that care can bankrupt a family and the children of a parent who needs that kind of care. An average cost for nursing home services, for example, of $70,000 can surely and quickly sink a lifetime of savings. This bill is far from perfect as it exists as part of the law. It needs to be changed. But instead of repealing it, we ought to be focusing on the change. Where is the commitment to doing something about long-term care? There haven't even been the hearings on how to resolve this problem.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You have another 15 seconds?
I yield the gentleman another 30 seconds.
It was the legendary Texas House Speaker of this body who said that it takes a master carpenter to build a barn, but any mule, I think he said, can tear one down. Well, it's time that we get together to build a solution for long-term health care, not just tear it down. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Speaker,
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
It is unconscionable to promise something to people when you know it won't be there. Your own administration admits the Class Act doesn't work. 0 people will be enrolled in the Class Act. They have a program that does not work, a program they know that does not work. That is building a false sense of security in people instead of working on the real policy. I yield 2 minutes at this time. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henseling, our conference chair.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chair, it is clear that the President's policies have failed. 1 in 7 now have to rely on food stamps. Half of America now is either classified as low income or in poverty, and millions remain unemployed. Yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office announced one more of the President's failures, and that is he is on track to deliver his fourth $4 trillion plus deficit in a row. Somebody needs to tell the President we've got to quit spending money we don't have for jobs we never get. One more failure, Madam Chair, is the President's health care program. Not a week goes by that I don't hear from hard-working small business people in the 5th District of Texas. I heard from a furniture businessman in Garland, Texas, who told me, quote, I could start 2 companies and hire multiple people, but based on this administration and the lack of facts with Obamacare, I'll continue to sit and wait. I heard from a gentleman who ran a music business in Palestine, Texas, quote, our business is hampered by the uncertainty of tax policy, regulations, and Obamacare. I had one in Dallas, Texas. After having to lay off 24 people in the last 2 years, wrote to me and said, you know what, we're going to have to terminate one more in February due almost entirely to the impact on my business of the health care reform we have. We are stymied. There is no doubt that the President's health care plan is killing jobs. House Republicans have repealed it in its totality. It has been blocked by the President, by Democrats, and so if we can't do it in its totality, we'll do it piecemeal. We need to start out by repealing the Class Act, which Secretary Sebelius said is totally unsustainable. Democrat Senate Budget Committee Chairman Kent Conrad called it a Ponzi scheme in the first order. The President's policies have failed. It's time to enact the House Republican plan for America's job creators. It's time to repeal the Class Act.